The Arizona sun painted the desert highway in shades of amber and rust as Marcus Reynolds throttled his golden Harley-Davidson through the empty stretch of Route 66. Behind him, her arms wrapped around his leather vest, sat Elena, his bride of exactly 47 minutes. Her white dress flowed in the wind like a silk flag of surrender, and the veil she refused to remove danced against his shoulder blades. They had just left the small chapel in Kingman, where 32 members of the Desert Knights Motorcycle Club had witnessed their union. The chrome of his custom Heritage Softail caught the afternoon light and threw golden sparks across the asphalt. Marcus smiled beneath his helmet, feeling the rumble of the engine sync with the rhythm of his heart. He was 53 years old. He had waited his entire life for this moment. The road ahead curved gently toward the horizon, where distant mountains rose like ancient sentinels guarding the passage to California. They had planned this route together, 300 miles of open highway before reaching the coastal resort where they would spend their honeymoon. No phones, no interruptions, just the two of them and the endless sky. Elena squeezed his waist and leaned her helmet against his back. Even through the leather, he could feel the warmth of her cheek. After 3 failed relationships, 2 decades of military service, and more lonely nights than he cared to remember, Marcus had finally found his peace. Elena was a trauma nurse at the VA hospital in Phoenix. She had seen him at his worst, waking from nightmares, struggling with the ghosts of 2 tours in the Gulf, drowning his memories in whiskey before finally getting sober 7 years ago. She had held his hand through all of it. And now, on this golden afternoon, she was his wife. The highway unfolded before them like a promise. Marcus had been vice president of the Desert Knights for 12 years. The club was different from the outlaw gangs that gave bikers their dangerous reputation. They ran charity rides, protected children at court hearings, escorted veterans to their final resting places. The patch on his back, a coyote howling beneath a crescent moon, represented honor, brotherhood, and service. Every member was either a veteran or a first responder. Every member lived by a code older than the constitution of any state. You protect those who cannot protect themselves, and you never leave a brother behind. Today, however, Marcus had left the brotherhood at the chapel parking lot. Today was about Elena. Today was about finally letting go of the past. The past. He pushed the thought away and focused on the road. The desert stretched endlessly on both sides, dotted with saguaro cacti standing like stoic witnesses to their passage. In the distance, a dust devil spun lazy circles before dissolving into nothing. The temperature gauge on his dashboard read 94 degrees, but the wind made it bearable. This was home. This was freedom. Elena tapped his shoulder and pointed to a rest stop sign ahead. 5 miles. He nodded and gave the throttle a gentle twist, letting the Harley surge forward with a throaty growl. They would stop, stretch their legs, maybe share a cold drink before continuing west. The simple pleasures of the road. These were the moments he had dreamed of during those endless nights in the desert overseas, when sleep meant nothing and survival meant everything. The rest stop appeared gradually, rising from the heat shimmer like a mirage made real. A cluster of picnic tables, a small convenience store, a handful of cars parked beneath the shade of aging cottonwood trees, and something else. Marcus saw it before his brain registered what it was. A woman stood beside an old motorcycle at the edge of the parking lot, her hands black with grease, her shoulders slumped in exhaustion. The bike, a vintage Yamaha that looked older than the decade, leaned against a fence post, its front tire flat, its engine exposed. A baby carrier sat in the shade nearby, and a small child, maybe 4 years old, played in the dirt with a stick, drawing shapes that only she could understand. The woman wore jeans torn at the knees, and a faded tank top soaked through with sweat. Her hair, dark and tangled, fell across her face as she bent over the engine. There was something familiar about the angle of her shoulders, something that tugged at a memory Marcus had buried deep, in that place where old wounds go to die. He pulled into the rest stop and killed the engine. Elena lifted her helmet and looked around, squinting against the brightness. The convenience store promised air conditioning and cold beverages. The picnic area offered shade. But Marcus was not looking at either of those things. He was looking at the woman with the broken motorcycle. And then she looked up. Time did that thing it does in moments of recognition. It stretched and compressed simultaneously, turning seconds into eternities and eternities into the space between heartbeats. Marcus removed his helmet slowly. The woman straightened. Their eyes met across 20 feet of cracked asphalt and 15 years of silence. It was Sophie. Sophie Marie Delacroix. The woman he had loved before the war. The woman who had promised to wait for him, who had written letters every week for the first 6 months of his deployment, whose voice on scratchy satellite phone calls had been the only thing keeping him sane during the worst nights in Fallujah. The woman who had stopped writing by month 7. The woman who had married someone else by month 12. The woman whose ghost he had carried across oceans and deserts and endless highways, never quite able to let her go. Sophie. She was 47 now, though she looked older. The desert had that effect on people. It aged them in ways that had nothing to do with time. Fine lines mapped her face like roads on a forgotten map. Her eyes, still that impossible shade of green that had haunted his dreams for years, held a weariness that went deeper than fatigue. She had been beautiful once, in the careless way that youth makes everyone beautiful. Now she was something else. Now she was real. The baby in the carrier began to cry. Elena touched Marcus on the arm. He turned to find her watching him with those observant eyes that had seen through every wall he had ever built. She did not ask who the woman was. She did not need to. Elena had heard the story of Sophie Delacroix on a night 3 years ago, when Marcus had finally found the courage to unlock that particular door. She had listened without judgment, held him without pity, and loved him without asking him to forget. Now she simply nodded toward the crying baby. Marcus understood what she was saying. Some things transcend rivalry and resentment. Some things are simply human. He walked toward Sophie. She watched him approach with an expression he could not read, something between fear and relief, defiance and surrender. The child playing in the dirt looked up at him with wide brown eyes, her stick paused mid-stroke. The baby continued to cry. Marcus stopped 3 feet away. Sophie pushed a strand of hair from her face, leaving a smear of grease across her cheekbone. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The desert wind carried dust and silence between them. Then Sophie laughed, a short, brittle sound that held no humor. Of all the rest stops on all the highways in all of Arizona. Her voice was raspier than he remembered, roughened by years of cigarettes or screaming or both. You had to pull into mine. Marcus did not smile. Your bike's dead. Thank you, Captain Obvious. I have been standing here for 2 hours figuring that out by myself. She gestured at the exposed engine. Fuel lines cracked. I patched it with electrical tape about 50 miles back, but it gave out. She shrugged. No cell service, no passing cars that bothered to stop. Just me and the kids and the sun. Marcus looked at the baby carrier. The infant inside, 6 months old, maybe 7, had red cheeks and was crying harder now. The kind of cry that spoke of heat and hunger and helplessness. The little girl with the stick stood up and walked to her mother's side, clutching Sophie's leg with dirty fingers. Mama, I'm thirsty. Sophie's face crumpled for just a moment, revealing the exhaustion beneath her defiance. Then she rebuilt herself, brick by brick, into something that could keep standing. I know, baby. Mama's working on it. Marcus turned back toward Elena. She was already walking toward the convenience store, her wedding dress swishing against the dust. She understood. She always understood. He faced Sophie again. I have tools in my saddlebag. Let me look at the fuel line. Sophie's eyes narrowed. I don't need your help, Marcus. Your baby is overheating and your daughter is dehydrated. This isn't about what you need. This is about them. Something flickered in her expression. That old stubbornness meeting something newer, something humbler. Motherhood, perhaps. Or simply survival. She stepped aside. Marcus knelt beside the motorcycle and examined the damage. The fuel line was worse than cracked. It was rotted through in multiple places, held together by faith and failing tape. The engine showed signs of neglect that spoke of poverty rather than ignorance. Sophie had always known her way around machines. Her father had been a mechanic in Flagstaff before the drinking took him, but there was only so much you could do with nothing, and it was clear that Sophie had been working with nothing for a very long time. He looked up at her. Where are you headed? Sophie crossed her arms. Tucson. My sister lives there. She said she might have some work for me. Might? It's been a while since we talked, but she's family. Sophie's voice hardened. She won't turn me away. Marcus did not point out the uncertainty in that statement. He did not ask about the father of the children or where she had come from or how she had ended up on the side of Route 66 with a dying motorcycle and 2 babies in the desert heat. Some questions answered themselves. Some questions were better left unasked. Elena returned from the convenience store carrying bottles of water and a bag of ice. She handed one bottle to Sophie, another to the little girl, and knelt beside the baby carrier with the ice, wrapping cubes in a paper towel to cool the infant's forehead. Sophie watched her with an expression that shifted from suspicion to gratitude to something like shame. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." Elena looked up and smiled, not with pity, but with understanding. "I'm a nurse. It's what I do." "She's also my wife," Marcus said from beside the motorcycle. "We got married about an hour ago." Sophie's face went through a series of transformations that would have been fascinating to watch if they weren't also painful. Surprise, recognition, understanding, and finally, something that might have been peace. "Congratulations," she said. And she meant it. "She seems like a good woman." "She is." Elena stood and brushed the dust from her wedding dress. The ice had calmed the baby, who now watched the adults with curious, glistening eyes. The little girl, her name was Lucy, Sophie would later say, was drinking the water in greedy gulps, her cheeks already looking less flushed. Marcus returned his attention to the fuel line. The repair he could manage would be temporary at best. A proper fix required parts that the convenience store did not sell and expertise that went beyond electrical tape and hope. "I can get you running," he said, "but you won't make it to Tucson, not on this line." Sophie's shoulders sagged. "How far?" 20 miles, maybe 30 if you take it slow." "What's in 30 miles?" "Oatman." Marcus stood and wiped his hands on a rag from his saddlebag. "Old mining town. Tourist trap now, but they have a garage. Guy named Pete runs it. He's a friend. Tell him Marcus sent you. He'll fix the line and won't charge you more than cost." Sophie's pride wrestled with her need. The need won. "I don't have much money. Pete owes me. Consider it settled." For a long moment, Sophie just looked at him. The years stretched between them like the highway itself, full of distance and dust and things left unsaid. Then she nodded. "Thank you, Marcus." He nodded back. Elena was watching them both with that quiet, observant stillness that made her such an effective nurse. She read people the way others read books, absorbing the narrative beneath the words, understanding the pain behind the posture. And what she saw now made her reach a decision that would change everything. "Sophie," Elena said, "when did you last eat?" Sophie's hesitation was answer enough. Elena turned to Marcus. "We passed a diner about 2 miles back. The Desert Rose, I think it was called. We could all use a meal before continuing." Marcus understood what she was really saying. She was inviting his past to their present, offering grace where judgment would have been easier, choosing compassion over comfort. This was why he loved her. This was why he had married her. He looked at Sophie. "We'll ride slow. You follow us to the diner, get some food, and then we'll escort you to Oatman to make sure you get there safe." Sophie's eyes glistened. Whether from the desert wind or something else, Marcus did not know. "You're on your honeymoon," she said. "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "We're offering." The baby cooed in her carrier, finally cool and calm. Lucy looked up at her mother with hopeful eyes. And Sophie, proud, stubborn, beautiful Sophie, finally let her walls come down. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories of redemption and second chances like this one only reach you if you are part of this community. And trust me, you will not want to miss what happens next." The Desert Rose Diner appeared through the heat shimmer like a neon oasis, turquoise and pink paint peeling from its adobe walls, vintage gas pumps standing sentinel by the entrance, and a hand-painted sign proclaiming the best cherry pie in 3 counties. The parking lot held a scattering of dusty pickup trucks and one ancient RV with California plates. The smell of grilling meat and fresh coffee drifted through the air, pulling them forward like a promise. Marcus pulled his Harley into the shade beside the entrance and killed the engine. Behind him, Sophie's Yamaha coughed and sputtered into silence, held together by the temporary repair and sheer determination. The little motorcycle looked even more battered in the unforgiving daylight, rust eating at the chrome, paint faded to memory, seat torn and patched with duct tape. It was the bike of someone who had run out of options. Elena dismounted and removed her helmet, shaking out her dark hair. Her wedding dress was wrinkled now, streaked with road dust and sweat, but she wore it like armor rather than costume. She had never cared much for appearances. What mattered was what you did, not how you looked doing it. Sophie climbed off her bike with the practiced motion of someone who had done it thousands of times, though her movements were stiff with exhaustion. She lifted the baby carrier first, checking the infant with the automatic concern of motherhood before helping Lucy down from the small seat where she had been strapped behind her. Lucy held her mother's hand and stared at the diner with wide eyes. For a child who had spent the last several hours stranded in the desert, the neon lights and promise of food must have seemed like magic. Marcus held the door for all of them. The interior of the Desert Rose was exactly what the exterior promised. A time capsule from the 1950s, all red vinyl booths and chrome counter stools, black and white checkered floor and jukebox in the corner playing something by Elvis. The air conditioning hit them like a blessing, instantly cooling the sweat on their skin and the fear in their hearts. A handful of customers looked up from their meals, truckers mostly, along with an elderly couple sharing a milkshake and a young man in hiking gear studying a map. A waitress in her 60s approached with menus and a smile that had probably served 1 million travelers over the decades. Her name tag said Betty, and the lines around her eyes suggested she had stories that could fill books. "Well now," Betty said, taking in the odd group before her. A man in biker leather, a woman in a wedding dress, another woman streaked with grease and exhaustion, a small child clutching a stick, and a baby in a carrier. "Looks like you folks have had quite a day." Elena smiled. "You could say that. Booth or counter?" "Booth," Marcus said. "Something in the back if you have it." Betty led them to a corner booth with worn vinyl seats that had cradled countless conversations over the years. The window looked out onto the parking lot, where their motorcycles sat side by side, gold and rust, new love and old wounds. They settled into the booth in an arrangement that felt both natural and strange. Marcus and Elena on one side, Sophie and Lucy on the other, the baby carrier resting on the seat between them. Lucy immediately grabbed the paper placemat and began drawing on it with a crayon Betty had produced from her apron pocket. Betty took their orders with the efficiency of long practice. Burgers for Marcus and Elena, a grilled cheese for Lucy, soup and bread for Sophie, who ordered the cheapest thing on the menu without looking at anyone, bottles of milk and juice for the children, coffee for the adults. When Betty walked away, silence settled over the table. It was Elena who broke it. "How old is the baby?" she asked Sophie, her tone the same gentle professional warmth she used with patience. Sophie looked down at the infant, who was now awake and watching the ceiling fans with fascinated eyes. 7 months. Her name is Maria, after my grandmother. She's beautiful. She looks like her father." Sophie's voice flattened on the last word, turning it into something clinical rather than affectionate. Marcus said nothing. He did not need to ask where Maria's father was. The absence in Sophie's voice told him everything. Lucy looked up from her drawing. "Daddy went away," she said matter-of-factly, with the honesty of children who have not yet learned to translate pain into silence. "He's not coming back." Sophie's hand trembled slightly as she stroked her daughter's hair. "That's right, baby. But we're going to be okay. We're going to Aunt Jenny's house, remember?" Lucy nodded and returned to her drawing. The crayon moved in circles that might have been suns or wheels or the endless loop of a child's hope. The food arrived faster than expected, carried by Betty on a tray that she balanced with decades of practice. The smell of grilled meat and melted cheese filled the booth, and for a few minutes no one spoke. They simply ate, letting the sustenance do what words could not, restore their bodies and quiet their fears. Marcus watched Sophie over the rim of his coffee cup. She ate with the careful restraint of someone who had learned to make every bite count, breaking her bread into small pieces and savoring each one. She fed Maria between her own mouthfuls, spooning formula from a bottle she had warmed under the hot water tap. The motions were automatic, effortless. the choreography of motherhood performed without thought. She was nothing like the girl he remembered. That's Sophie, the one who had danced with him at the county fair, who had kissed him goodbye at the bus station, who had promised forever in letters written on pink paper, had been all fire and dreams. She had wanted to see the world, to ride motorcycles across continents, to collect experiences like other people collected stamps. She had been reckless and brave and beautiful, and Marcus had loved her with the desperate intensity of youth. This Sophie was something else. She was a mother. She was a survivor. She was a woman who had been broken by life and had reassembled herself into something that could keep going, keep fighting, keep putting one foot in front of the other for the sake of her children. It was a different kind of beauty, a harder kind, but beauty nonetheless. Elena nudged his foot under the table, a gentle reminder that she was there, that she was his present and his future, that the past was just a country he had once visited and would never return to. He reached across the table and took her hand. Sophie noticed the gesture. Something flickered in her eyes, not jealousy, but recognition, an acknowledgement that Marcus had found something she was still searching for. "How long have you two been together?" Sophie asked. 4 years, Elena replied. "We met at the VA hospital. I was his nurse after a surgery." "What kind of surgery?" Elena looked at Marcus, letting him decide how much to share. "Heart valve replacement," Marcus said. "Turns out all those years of stress caught up with me." Sophie nodded slowly. "I heard you made it through the deployment. Both tours. I heard—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "I heard a lot of things." "From who?" "People." Sophie pushed her soup bowl away, leaving half untouched. "Flagstaff is a small town. Word gets around even when you don't want it to." Marcus set down his coffee cup. "Sophie, what happened? With us, I mean. You stopped writing. You stopped calling. And then I came home and you were married to Danny." Sophie said the name like she was spitting out something spoiled. "Danny Whitaker, the mechanic's son. The mechanic's charming, lying, cheating son." Sophie's voice hardened. "I was young and stupid and scared. You were gone for so long, Marcus, and Danny was there. He said all the right things, promised all the right promises." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out promises are easy to make and hard to keep." Lucy looked up from her drawing again. Sophie smoothed her daughter's hair and forced a smile. "That's how I got Lucy. That's the one good thing that came from that marriage." Elena leaned forward. "And Maria?" Sophie's face tightened. "Maria's father was a truck driver I met after Danny left. He stayed for a while. Helped with rent, helped with Lucy. I thought maybe—" She shook her head. "But he had a wife in Colorado, a family he forgot to mention. When she found out about us, he disappeared. That was 8 months ago." The weight of her story settled over the table like dust after a storm. Here was a woman who had been let down by every man who had ever promised her something, who had built her life on foundations that kept crumbling beneath her feet, who had nothing left but her children, and an old motorcycle and a hope that might not be answered. Marcus thought about all the nights he had spent hating Sophie Delacroix, all the whiskey he had drunk trying to forget her face, all the roads he had ridden trying to outrun her memory. And now here she was, not the villain of his story, but simply another wounded traveler on the same broken highway. Forgiveness is not a single moment. It is a series of choices made over and over again until one day you realize the weight you have been carrying is finally gone. Marcus made his choice. "Sophie," he said, "tell me about your sister in Tucson." Sophie looked up, surprised by the change in direction. "Jenny? She's 2 years younger than me. We weren't close growing up. She moved to Tucson for college and never came back. But she reached out a few months ago when she heard about Maria's father leaving. Said she might have work for me at her store." "What kind of store?" "She runs a vintage clothing shop. Says she needs help with the books and with customers." Sophie's voice held a fragile hope. "It's not much, but it's something. And she has a spare room. A place where the girls can have their own beds." Elena nodded. "That sounds like a good plan." "It's the only plan I have." Sophie looked out the window at the parking lot, at the rust-eaten motorcycle that had carried her this far. "I sold everything else, the apartment, the furniture, Danny's truck that he left behind. All of it went to pay off debts and buy that bike. It was supposed to get me to Tucson. It was supposed to be the last ride. The last ride. Marcus knew what that phrase meant in the biker world. It did not always mean the final journey to a new life. Sometimes it meant something darker, something final. He studied Sophie's face, looking for the signs, the hollowness, the resignation, the quiet surrender that came before the storm. What he saw instead was determination. Exhausted, battered, barely held together determination, but determination nonetheless. Sophie Delacroix was not ready to give up. She was not ready to let her children become orphans. She was simply running out of road. Marcus reached into his vest pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for, then hit dial. "Who are you calling?" Sophie asked. "An old friend." The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah? Pete. It's Marcus Reynolds." A pause. Then a laugh that sounded like gravel in a tumbler. "Well, I'll be." "Marcus Reynolds back from the dead. I heard you were getting hitched today." "Just did." "Listen, I need a favor." "Name it." Marcus explained the situation briefly. The broken fuel line, the woman with 2 kids, the journey to Tucson that was stranded 30 miles short of help. Pete listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, he spoke. "Bring her to the shop. I'll have the part waiting. And tell her not to worry about money. Anyone who rides with kids in the desert has already paid enough." "Thanks, Pete. I owe you." "No, you don't. But if you want to buy me a beer sometime, I won't say no." Marcus hung up and looked at Sophie. "You're set. Pete will have the fuel line ready when we get to Oatman. He'll fix it while you rest, and you can be on the road to Tucson by morning." Sophie stared at him. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the moisture away before it could become tears. "Marcus, I don't understand. After everything I did to you, why are you helping me?" He thought about the question. Thought about all the answers he could give. Duty, honor, the code of the road. But none of them were quite true. "Because once upon a time," he said finally, "I loved you. And I don't want to remember you as the woman who hurt me. I want to remember you as the woman who raised 2 beautiful daughters and made it to Tucson and built a life worth living." Sophie's walls crumbled. The tears came, silent and quick, streaming down her grease-smeared cheeks. She did not sob. She did not wail. She simply let the water fall, releasing years of pain and shame and loneliness in a single unguarded moment. Lucy looked up with concern. "Mama? Why are you crying?" Sophie pulled her daughter close and kissed the top of her head. "Because sometimes, baby, even when things are hard, people surprise you. Sometimes people are kind when they don't have to be. And that's worth crying about." Elena reached across the table and touched Sophie's hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. One woman acknowledging another's pain, one mother understanding another's fear. Outside, the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The desert was cooling, preparing for the cold night that would follow the blazing day. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote began its evening song. Betty returned to clear the plates and refill the coffee cups. She took one look at Sophie's tear-streaked face and produced a clean napkin from her apron. "Rough day, honey?" Sophie laughed through her tears. "You could say that." Betty patted her shoulder with the easy comfort of someone who had seen every kind of trouble pass through her diner. "Well, whatever it is, it's going to be okay. You've got good people with you, and good people make all the difference." She walked away, leaving them in the golden glow of the sunset streaming through the windows. Marcus looked at his wife. Elena looked back at him. And in that wordless exchange was an entire conversation about kindness and courage, about the past and the future, about what it meant to truly start fresh. "We should get moving," Marcus said. "Still have 20 miles to Oatman before dark." Sophie wiped her face with Betty's napkin and nodded. She stood and lifted Maria's carrier, then took Lucy's hand. "Thank you," she said to both of them. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Elena smiled. "Just make it to Tucson, that's payment enough." They walked out into the cooling evening, leaving the warmth of the diner behind. The motorcycles waited in the parking lot, golden and rust, new love and old wounds. And together, they rode toward the sunset. The road to Oatman wound through desert and mountains, climbing gradually from the flat basin floor to the rocky outcrops that marked the entrance to the old mining country. The temperature dropped as they gained elevation, and the light took on that soft golden quality that photographers called magic hour. It was the kind of light that made everything look like a memory, even as it was happening. Marcus led the way, keeping his speed low to accommodate Sophie's struggling motorcycle. Elena rode behind him, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. Behind them, Sophie's Yamaha coughed and sputtered, but kept moving, carried forward by Pete's promise and her own desperate hope. Lucy had fallen asleep against her mother's back, lulled by the vibration of the engine and the rhythm of the road. Maria was quiet in her carrier, strapped securely to Sophie's chest with a wrap that had seen better days. The baby watched the passing scenery with wide, innocent eyes, too young to understand the journey they were on, but old enough to feel its importance. The landscape changed as they climbed. Desert gave way to scrubland to rocky hills dotted with old mine shafts and abandoned equipment. This was gold rush country, once teeming with prospectors and dreamers, now home to ghosts and tourists, and a few stubborn residents who refused to let the old ways die. Oatman appeared around a final bend, a single main street lined with wooden buildings from the 1800s, false fronts and hitching posts, hand-painted signs advertising antiques and curiosities, and the famous wild burros that roamed freely through town. The burros were descendants of pack animals released by miners when the gold ran out, and they had become Oatman's main attraction. Gentle, persistent creatures that would follow tourists down the street in search of treats. Pete's garage sat at the far end of town, past the general store and the Oatman Hotel, where Clark Gable and Carol Lombard had spent their wedding night. The building was unremarkable. Corrugated metal walls, hand-lettered sign, a collection of motorcycles in various states of repair scattered across the lot. But to Sophie, it must have looked like salvation. Marcus pulled his Harley to a stop beside the garage door and cut the engine. Sophie followed, her Yamaha giving one final cough before falling silent. A man emerged from the darkness of the garage, wiping his hands on a rag that had probably never been clean. Pete Vasquez was in his 60s, with a silver beard and tattoos covering both arms, the faded ink of a former Marine who had traded combat for carburetors. He had been friends with Marcus for nearly 20 years, ever since they had met at a veterans rally in Tucson and discovered they shared the same taste in motorcycles and whiskey. Pete looked at Sophie's bike and let out a low whistle. Lord have mercy. That thing's held together by prayers and promises. He glanced at Sophie, at the baby strapped to her chest, at the sleeping child on her back. His expression softened. But it got you here. That's what matters. Sophie dismounted carefully, trying not to wake Lucy. You must be Pete. Marcus said you could help. I can do more than help. I can work miracles. Pete grinned, showing a gap where his left incisor used to be. But first, let's get you and those babies somewhere comfortable. My wife Rosa has cold lemonade and soft chairs inside. He led them around the side of the garage to a small adobe house that had probably been standing since Oatman was a boomtown. The interior was cool and dark, decorated with southwestern art and family photographs spanning multiple generations. A woman appeared from the kitchen, Rosa, petite and silver-haired, with the kind of face that had laughed often and worried more. Dios mío, Rosa said when she saw Sophie. You look like you've been through a war. Just the desert, Sophie replied. But some days it's the same thing. Rosa took charge immediately, the way women of a certain age and temperament always do. She settled Sophie in a comfortable chair, brought cold drinks for everyone, produced a portable crib for Maria that had probably belonged to one of her grandchildren. Lucy woke up just long enough to be given a cookie before falling asleep again on a couch in the corner, clutching a cushion like a teddy bear. Marcus and Elena stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. There was something timeless about it. The weary traveler taken in by strangers, the children made comfortable, the community rising to meet a need without being asked. Pete touched Marcus on the shoulder. Let me show you the part I got for her bike. It's going to take a couple hours to install, but she'll be good as new by morning. They walked back to the garage, leaving the women to their quiet communion. Inside, Pete pulled a new fuel line from a shelf and held it up to the light. This will do the job. And while I'm at it, I'll check the rest of the engine. Make sure nothing else is about to give out. Marcus nodded. Thanks, Pete. I mean it. Pete set down the part and turned to face his friend. So, you want to tell me what's really going on here? Marcus said nothing. I've known you for 20 years, brother. And in all that time, I've never seen you ride with a woman who wasn't Elena. Now you show up on your wedding day escorting your ex-girlfriend and her kids across the desert. Pete crossed his arms. I'm not judging. I'm just asking. Marcus leaned against a workbench and looked out the window at the mountains turning purple in the fading light. She was stranded at a rest stop. Her bike was dying. She had 2 babies with her and nowhere to go. He shrugged. What was I supposed to do? Leave her there? Some men would have. I'm not some men. Pete studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. No, you're not. That's why the desert nights follow you. Marcus shook his head. I haven't been active in the club for years, not since the surgery. Doesn't matter. Once a night, always a night. And the code doesn't change just because you stopped riding with us. Pete picked up a wrench and began working on Sophie's motorcycle. You did the right thing today, Marcus. Elena knows it too. I could see it in her face. Elena's the best person I know. Then hold on to her. Women like that don't come around twice. Marcus thought about Sophie, about the girl she had been and the woman she had become, about the life she might have lived if she had waited for him, and the life she had actually lived instead. About the choices we make when we are young and the prices we pay when we are old. Then he thought about Elena, about her kindness, her strength, her willingness to share her wedding day with a stranger in need, about the way she had held his hand through surgery and nightmares, and the long, slow work of becoming a better man. Pete was right. Women like Elena did not come around twice, and Marcus intended to spend the rest of his life proving he deserved her. Back in the house, something was happening. When Marcus returned, he found Sophie and Elena sitting together on the small porch, watching the last of the sunset paint the mountains gold. The babies were asleep inside, watched over by Rosa, who was humming softly as she straightened the crib. Lucy remained on the couch, her small chest rising and falling with the deep breaths of childhood exhaustion. But Sophie and Elena were not asleep. They were talking. Marcus paused in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. Their voices were soft, intimate, the kind of conversation that happens between women who have found unexpected common ground. And he never talked about it, Sophie was saying. But I knew something had changed. The Marcus who came home from that first tour was not the same Marcus who left. Elena nodded. Combat does that. Changes people in ways they can't explain and don't understand. I was scared. Sophie's voice cracked. I was 19 years old and scared, and Danny was there with his smooth words and his easy promises. And I thought... She stopped, swallowed. I thought Marcus would be better off without me. I thought I was doing him a favor. Were you? Sophie laughed bitterly. No, I was being a coward. I told myself I was protecting him, but really I was protecting myself. From the waiting, from the not knowing, from the person I might become if I stayed. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm glad you told me that. Why? Because now I understand. Elena turned to face her. I spent 3 years wondering what happened between you and Marcus. He never blamed you, not once. He just said that young love rarely survives distance, and that you both made choices you couldn't take back. Sophie wiped her eyes. He really said that? He really said that. The sun had set now, leaving the sky streaked with purple and pink. Stars were beginning to appear, faint pinpricks of light in the deepening dark. Somewhere in town, a burro brayed, answered by another in the hills. Sophie stood and walked to the edge of the porch. I'm going to make it to Tucson, she said. I'm going to start over. I'm going to give my daughters a life they can be proud of. I believe you. Sophie turned back to Elena. And you're going to have a beautiful marriage. I can tell. She smiled, small but genuine. Marcus always had good instincts about people. And he chose you. That means something. Elena rose and crossed the porch to stand beside her. Maybe we can stay in touch. After you get settled, the girls would probably like to have more people who care about them. For a moment, Sophie looked like she might refuse, the old pride rising up, the instinct to handle everything alone. Then she let it go. I would like that, she said. I would like that very much. Marcus stepped onto the porch, letting them know he was there. Both women turned to face him, his past and his present, standing side by side in the dying light. Pete says the bike will be ready by morning, he said. He's going to work through the night. Sophie nodded. He's a good man. He is. And so is his wife. They've offered you a room for the night. You and the girls can get some real sleep before the final leg to Tucson. Sophie's eyes welled up again, but this time she did not try to hide it. Why are you all being so kind to me? After everything? Marcus thought about all the possible answers. The debt of old love, the code of the road, the simple human imperative to help those in need. But what he said was simpler. Because we've all been broken, Sophie. We've all made mistakes we can't take back. And we've all needed someone to help us find our way home. Sophie crossed the porch and hugged him. Not the embrace of a lover, but the embrace of an old friend. Someone who had known him when he was young, before the war and the scars and the long road to becoming who he was now. When she released him, she looked into his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Then she turned and walked inside to check on her daughters. Elena took Marcus's hand. "That was beautiful," she said. "She needed to hear it. So did you." Marcus looked at his wife, still a strange and wonderful word, and saw everything he had ever wanted reflected in her eyes. "Ready to continue our honeymoon?" he asked. Elena smiled. "I think we've been on it all along." They stood together on the porch as the night settled over Oatman, watching the stars emerge one by one. The ancient mountains kept their silent vigil. The burros wandered their eternal routes. And somewhere in the darkness, Pete worked through the night to give a stranger her chance at redemption. If this story has touched your heart, leave a comment below saying, "Second chances are real." Let me know that you believe in redemption, that you believe in kindness, that you believe in the possibility of new beginnings. Drop that comment now, and let's build a community of people who still have hope. Morning came to Oatman with the quiet authority of the desert. Sudden light spilling over the mountains, warming the cold stone and stirring the burros from their nighttime wandering. The town came alive in pieces. A shopkeeper sweeping his porch, a waitress turning the sign on the hotel restaurant from closed to open, the distant sound of Pete's tools still ringing from the garage where he had worked through the darkness. Marcus woke with Elena in his arms, lying on a pull-out bed in Pete and Rosa's guest room. They had not planned to spend their wedding night in an old mining town surrounded by wild donkeys and other people's children, but life rarely followed plans. And somehow, this felt right. This felt real. Elena stirred against him, her eyes opening slowly. "Morning. Morning." He kissed her forehead. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected. Rosa's mattress is surprisingly comfortable. She says it's the dry air. Good for the joints." Elena smiled and stretched, her wedding dress long since replaced by borrowed pajamas. "What time is it?" "Almost 7. Pete should be finishing up the bike about now." They rose and dressed quietly, moving with the easy coordination of people who have learned each other's rhythms. By the time they emerged into the main room, Rosa had breakfast waiting: eggs and bacon, fresh tortillas, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Sophie was already at the table, Maria in her lap, Lucy beside her working through a stack of pancakes with serious concentration. The transformation from yesterday was remarkable. Rest and food and hope had done their work. Sophie's eyes were clearer, her posture straighter, her voice steadier when she spoke. "Good morning," she said. "Rosa tells me Pete finished the bike an hour ago. He's been test riding it around town to make sure everything holds." Marcus accepted a cup of coffee from Rosa and sat down across from Sophie. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous." Sophie adjusted Maria on her lap. "But ready. I called my sister this morning. Actually spoke to her instead of just hoping. She's expecting us by this afternoon. That's good news." "It is." Sophie paused. "She cried when I told her what happened. About the bike breaking down, about you finding me, about all of it. She said," Sophie's voice caught, "she said she wished she had been there, that she wished she had known how bad things had gotten." Elena sat down beside Marcus. "Family can be complicated, but it sounds like she wants to help." "She does. For the first time in a long time, I actually believe that." Pete appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on that eternal rag. His eyes were red-rimmed from a night without sleep, but his face held the satisfaction of work well done. "Lady's bike is ready to roll," he announced. "New fuel line, tuned engine, fresh oil, and I threw in new brake pads because the old ones were a lawsuit waiting to happen." He grinned at Sophie. "Should get you to Tucson and back 3 times without a problem." Sophie stood, careful not to jostle Maria. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't need thanks. Just promise me you'll take care of those girls and let Rosa know when you're settled. She worries about everyone, and you're on her list now." Rosa swatted her husband with a dish towel, but her smile confirmed the truth of his words. The next hour passed in preparation. Lucy was dressed and fed and reminded to use the bathroom before the long ride. Maria was changed and strapped securely into her carrier. Sophie's few belongings were packed into the saddlebags Pete had reinforced with extra straps. The old Yamaha sat in the morning sun, looking almost dignified now that it had been restored to working order. When everything was ready, they gathered in the parking lot for the farewell. Marcus stood beside his Harley, Elena at his side. Sophie stood beside her Yamaha, her daughters close. Pete and Rosa watched from the garage doorway, their arms around each other. 2 people who had spent 50 years learning that love was as much about what you did for strangers as what you did for yourself. Sophie spoke first. "I know I said thank you already, about 100 times, but I need to say it again." She looked at Marcus, then at Elena. "What you did yesterday, stopping at that rest stop, giving me food, escorting me here, treating me with kindness when you had every right to turn away. It changed something in me. It reminded me that the world still has good people in it, that I can still be one of them." Marcus shook his head. "You were always good, Sophie. You just got lost for a while. We all get lost sometimes." Elena stepped forward and hugged Sophie tightly. "But you're finding your way now. That's what matters." Lucy tugged on Marcus's jeans. He looked down to find her holding up a piece of paper, a crayon drawing of 4 figures standing in front of what might have been a motorcycle or a dragon or both. "This is for you," Lucy said solemnly. "So you remember us." Marcus knelt down to accept the drawing. The figures were barely recognizable as human, but the intention was clear. 2 tall shapes, 2 small shapes, and something golden between them. "I'll keep it forever," he promised. Lucy nodded, satisfied, and returned to her mother's side. Sophie climbed onto the Yamaha and settled Lucy in front of her, then adjusted Maria's carrier against her chest. The bike came to life with a clean purr, nothing like the coughing struggle of yesterday. Pete's work had been thorough. She looked back at Marcus one last time. "Take care of yourself, Marcus Reynolds, and take care of her." She nodded toward Elena. "You deserve each other." "Same to you, Sophie Delacroix. Go build that new life." Sophie smiled. The first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her since before the war. Then she turned the bike toward the highway and rode south, toward Tucson, toward her sister, toward whatever came next. They watched until she was out of sight. Then, when the dust had settled and the sound of her engine had faded into the desert, Marcus turned to Elena. "Ready to continue our honeymoon?" Elena took his hand. "After everything that's happened, I think we've earned it." They said their goodbyes to Pete and Rosa, promised to visit again soon, and climbed onto the golden Harley that had carried them so far. The engine rumbled to life. The sun warmed their backs. The road stretched ahead, leading west toward California and the coast, and all the tomorrows they had promised each other. Marcus gave the throttle a twist, and they rode off into the morning. But they did not get far. 30 miles west of Oatman, on a stretch of highway that wound through red rock canyons and ancient stone formations, Marcus noticed something in his rearview mirror. A cluster of motorcycles was approaching from behind, moving fast, their chrome catching the sunlight like weapons. He tensed automatically. A lifetime of vigilance was hard to unlearn. Elena felt the change in his posture and tightened her grip on his waist. "What is it?" "Company, 6 bikes coming up fast." The motorcycles drew closer, and Marcus's tension began to ease. He recognized the formation. He recognized the patches on their vests. He recognized the lead rider's distinctive helmet, painted with the image of a coyote howling at the moon. The desert nights had found him. The formation split smoothly, 3 bikes pulling alongside on each side, matching his speed with precision. The lead rider, a massive man named Bear who had been president of the club for 15 years, pulled up next to Marcus and lifted his visor. "You really thought you could get married without us?" Bear's voice boomed over the wind and engines. "Brother, we've been tracking you since Kingman." Marcus could not help but laugh. "I told you I wanted a quiet honeymoon. And you'll have one, after we give you a proper escort to the coast." Bear's grin was visible even through the helmet. "Consider it a wedding gift from the Brotherhood." Elena's laughter joined Marcus's, releasing tension neither of them had realized they were carrying. The Desert Knights, all 6 of them, the club's senior members, had taken time from their lives to ride across Arizona and ensure their vice president received the send-off he deserved. This was what brotherhood meant. Not obligation, not duty. Simply showing up because that was what family did. The formation tightened, 8 motorcycles moving as one through the canyon roads. The sound of their engines echoed off the rock walls like thunder, rolling across the desert and announcing to the world that the Desert Knights were riding. And in the middle of that thunder, Marcus Reynolds held his wife and smiled. Some things in life you plan for years. Some things happen in an instant. And some things, the best things, come when you least expect them, carried on the wings of strangers who become family and old wounds that become new beginnings. They rode west toward the setting sun. The California coast appeared as a shimmer of blue on the horizon, gradually resolving into cliffs and beaches and the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The Desert Knights had escorted them all the way to Santa Monica, a journey of nearly 300 miles that had taken most of the day. Now, as the sun began its descent toward the water, the formation pulled into the parking lot of the seaside hotel that Marcus had booked for their honeymoon. Bear killed his engine and removed his helmet, revealing a face creased by decades of sun and wind and laughter. The other knights followed suit, 6 men ranging in age from 40 to 70, each bearing the marks of lives lived at full throttle. "This is where we leave you," Bear said, clasping Marcus's hand in a grip that could crush stone. "You've earned your rest, brother. Go enjoy your bride." Marcus looked at the men who had ridden hundreds of miles to honor him, at Buck, the former Army medic who had patched up more club members than he could count, at Sonny, the 72-year-old who still rode like he was 20, at Mac and Dice and Walker, each with their own stories and their own scars. "Thank you," Marcus said, "all of you. This means more than I can say. You do the same for us." Bear released his hand. "Now go. And Marcus, treat her right. Women like that don't happen twice." It was the second time in 2 days someone had said those words. Marcus intended to spend the rest of his life proving them right. The knights mounted their bikes, the engines roaring to life in a synchronized symphony. One by one, they pulled out of the parking lot, heading back east toward Arizona, toward their homes and their families and the endless roads that called them. Marcus and Elena watched until the last motorcycle disappeared into the fading light. Then they turned toward the hotel. The room was everything Marcus had hoped for. A suite overlooking the ocean, with a private balcony and a bed big enough to get lost in. Elena stood at the window, watching the waves roll in, her silhouette framed by the golden light of sunset. "It's beautiful," she said. Marcus came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "So are you." She turned in his embrace and looked up at him with those eyes that had seen through every wall he had ever built. "Tell me something," she said. "Yesterday, when you saw Sophie at that rest stop, what went through your mind?" Marcus thought about the question, thought about all the feelings that had crashed through him in that moment. Surprise, confusion, old pain, older regret. "Fear," he admitted. "I was afraid that seeing her would bring back all the hurt, would make me question everything we've built." "Did it?" "No." He pulled her closer. "If anything, it confirmed what I already knew. Sophie was my past. You're my future. And the only thing seeing her did was make me grateful. Grateful for everything that had to happen to bring me here, to this moment with you." Elena smiled and kissed him softly. "That's a good answer. It's the truth." They stood together in the golden light, 2 people who had found each other across years of loneliness and loss, who had chosen to build something new from the rubble of their separate pasts. "Marcus," Elena said, "there's something I've been thinking about. Since yesterday." "What's that?" "Sophie and her daughters. They're starting over with nothing. Her sister might help, but that's a lot of weight for one person to carry." Elena pulled back slightly to look at him. I was thinking, what if we did something more? Marcus waited. The Desert Knights have that fund, right? The one for helping members and their families in crisis. The Brotherhood Fund. We set it up 10 years ago. What if you talked to Bear? Asked if they could extend some support to Sophie. Elena's eyes were earnest. Not charity. She'd never accept charity. But maybe job referrals, or help finding housing, or just knowing there's a community that has her back. The way they had your back today. Marcus considered it. Sophie was not a member of the club, but the Desert Knights had always operated on a broader definition of family than most. They protected children at court hearings, they escorted veterans to funerals, they stood guard at hospitals and schools and anywhere else their presence could make a difference. And Sophie, whatever else she was a mother trying to protect her children. If that did not qualify for the Brotherhood Fund, nothing did. I'll call Bear in the morning, Marcus said. See what we can do. Elena's face lit up. Really? Really? You're right. She shouldn't have to do this alone. None of us should. Elena hugged him tightly. This is why I love you, Marcus Reynolds. Because you never stopped trying to make things better. I learned it from you. They stood together as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The waves continued their eternal rhythm, carrying the memories of 1,000 travelers who had stood on this same shore, looking west, hoping for tomorrow. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He almost ignored it. This was supposed to be his honeymoon, after all. But something made him pull it out and check the screen. It was a text from Sophie. Made it to Tucson. Jenny was waiting with open arms. Girls already have their own room. Thank you. For everything. Attached was a photo. Sophie and her sister Jenny, standing in front of a small house with a garden, Lucy between them holding up a crayon drawing of a motorcycle. Maria was asleep in Sophie's arms, peaceful and content. Marcus showed Elena the message. She made it, Elena said softly. She actually made it. She did. Think she's going to be okay? Marcus looked at the photo, at the smile on Sophie's face, at the hope in her eyes, at the daughters who would grow up knowing that sometimes, when the road seems darkest, strangers become angels and broken things get mended. Yeah, he said. I think she's going to be just fine. He put the phone away and turned back to the sunset. Somewhere out there, the Desert Knights were riding home through the desert night. Somewhere out there, Sophie was tucking her daughters into their new beds. Somewhere out there, the road stretched endlessly, carrying travelers toward their individual destinies. And here, on this balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Marcus Reynolds held his wife and watched the sun sink into the sea. Tomorrow would bring new adventures. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow would bring all the joys and sorrows that came with being alive. But tonight, there was only this. 2 hearts beating in unison, a golden light fading to purple, and the quiet certainty that love, when properly tended, could survive any distance. Happy honeymoon, Elena whispered. Happy honeymoon, Marcus replied. And together they watched the stars emerge. 3 months later, the weather had turned cold in Tucson, carrying the crisp bite of a desert winter. The morning sun cast long shadows across the vintage clothing shop on 4th Avenue, where Sophie Delacroix, once broken, now rebuilding, unlocked the front door and flipped the sign from closed to open. The shop was called Second Chances. Her sister Jenny had named it years ago, never knowing how prophetic that name would become. Sophie moved through the store, straightening racks of vintage dresses and checking the register, her movements calm and practiced. 3 months of steady work had taught her the rhythms of the business, which customers wanted to browse alone, which needed guidance, which would buy, and which were just killing time. She had discovered, to her surprise, that she was good at this, good at reading people, good at helping them find what they were looking for. Lucy was at preschool now, enrolled in a program Jenny had helped arrange. Maria was at the daycare 2 blocks away, watched over by a grandmother figure who charged almost nothing and treated every child like her own. For the first time in years, Sophie had actual hours to herself, hours to work, hours to think, hours to become someone new. The bell above the door chimed, and Sophie looked up to see a woman enter, a woman she recognized immediately. Elena Reynolds wore a light jacket over jeans and a simple blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked different from the last time Sophie had seen her, more relaxed, more settled, more at home in her own skin. The wedding dress was gone, replaced by the casual confidence of a woman comfortable with who she had become. "Elena?" Sophie came around the counter, genuinely surprised. "What are you doing in Tucson?" "Marcus has a checkup at the VA hospital here. His doctor retired and the new specialist is in this office." Elena smiled. "I thought I'd look you up while he's in with the cardiologist." "How did you find me?" "You're not hard to find. You're the only vintage clothing shop in Tucson that specializes in motorcycle memorabilia." Sophie laughed. It had been Jenny's idea to add a section of vintage biker gear to the store. Leather jackets, patches, boots, even some old helmets. The irony was not lost on either of them. "Can I get you some coffee?" Sophie asked. "Jenny installed an espresso machine last month. She says it's for the customers, but really it's because she can't function without caffeine." "Coffee would be wonderful." Sophie led Elena to a small seating area near the back of the shop, where two armchairs faced a window overlooking the courtyard garden. She made 2 espressos with the practiced hands of someone who had learned quickly, and they settled into the chairs with their cups warming their palms. "How are the girls?" Elena asked. "Thriving." Sophie could not keep the pride from her voice. "Lucy loves preschool. Her teacher says she's already reading at a first-grade level. And Maria's crawling now, getting into everything. Jenny calls her the tiny tornado." "That's wonderful." "It is. It really is." Sophie sipped her espresso. "And how are you and Marcus? How's married life treating you?" "Better than I ever imagined." Elena's face softened. "We bought a house last month. Nothing fancy, just a little place in Phoenix with a garage for his motorcycle and a garden for my vegetables, but it feels like home." "He's happy?" "He's happier than I've ever seen him. The surgery cleared him for moderate riding, so he's back with the Desert Knights a few days a month. Not as much as before, but enough to feel connected." Elena paused. "He talks about you sometimes, you know." Sophie looked up sharply. "Not like that," Elena assured her. "He talks about what you represent. About the importance of second chances. About how we can't carry the past forever. We have to put it down eventually and pick up something new." Sophie felt tears threatening and blinked them back. He always was wiser than he knew. He was. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 women who had started as rivals and become something closer to friends. The past lay between them like a closed book, acknowledged but no longer read. "There's actually another reason I wanted to see you," Elena said. "Marcus wanted me to give you something." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, which she handed to Sophie. Sophie opened it carefully. Inside was a card, handwritten in Marcus's distinctive script, and something else. A patch. A black patch with an image of a coyote howling beneath a crescent moon. The Desert Knights patch. Sophie looked up, confused. "I don't understand." "Read the card." Sophie unfolded it and read, "Sophie, the Desert Knights voted last week to extend honorary membership to you and your daughters. This means you're under our protection. If you ever need help and with anything, you call the number on the back of this card and someone will answer. You're not alone anymore. You never will be again. Welcome to the family. Marcus." The tears came then, falling freely down her cheeks. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Elena reached over and took her hand. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that you have people in your corner now. People who will show up when you need them. That's what the patch means." Sophie clutched the patch like a talisman. It was just a piece of fabric, thread and ink and nothing more. But it represented something she had lost years ago and thought she would never find again. Community, belonging, family. The bell above the door chimed again. A customer entered, a young woman in her 20s browsing the racks with the careful attention of someone looking for something specific. Sophie wiped her eyes, tucked the patch into her pocket, and stood. "I should help her," she said. "Will you stay?" "For a little while. Marcus won't be done for another hour." Sophie nodded and walked toward the customer, her stride steady, her shoulders square. Elena watched her go, watching the transformation in real time, the broken woman from the rest stop becoming the confident shopkeeper, the survivor becoming the helper, the past giving way to the future. When Sophie had finished with the customer, she returned to find Elena looking at her phone with a soft smile. Good news? The best. Marcus just texted. The cardiologist says his heart is stronger than it's been in years. The surgery was a complete success. Elena looked up with shining eyes. He says he feels 20 years younger. Sophie smiled. That's wonderful, Elena. You two deserve every happiness. So do you. Elena stood and embraced Sophie tightly. And I meant what I said about staying in touch. Lucy's birthday's coming up, isn't it? Maybe Marcus and I could come down for a visit. Bring some presents for the girls. Sophie hugged her back. I would love that. They would love that. They parted at the door of the shop, two women whose paths had crossed in the most unlikely of circumstances and who had chosen grace over grievance. Elena walked back toward the VA hospital. Sophie returned to her work, and the sun continued its arc across the Tucson sky, marking another day in a story that was still being written. That evening, after the shop had closed and the girls had been fed and bathed and put to bed, Sophie sat alone on the small porch of her sister's house. The night was cold but clear, filled with stars that seemed impossibly bright after years of city living. She held the Desert Nights patch in her hands, running her fingers over the embroidered coyote. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a text from Jenny, who was at a friend's house for the evening, checking in, making sure everything was okay, being the sister she had not known how to be before. Everything was okay. More than okay. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Sophie felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. She thought about the road that had brought her here, the mistakes she had made, the men who had let her down, the moments when she had considered giving up entirely. And she thought about the afternoon at that Arizona rest stop when a man from her past had stopped his golden motorcycle and looked at her with eyes that held no resentment, only concern. What if Marcus had not stopped? What if he had seen her, recognized her, and decided she deserved to struggle alone? What if Elena had been a different kind of woman, one who saw Sophie as a threat rather than a fellow traveler? The answers to those questions led down paths Sophie did not want to walk, because the truth was, any of those outcomes had been possible. The world was full of people who looked away, full of people who held grudges, full of people who hoarded their kindness for those who earned it. But Marcus had stopped. Elena had offered grace. The Desert Nights had opened their arms to a stranger, and that had made all the difference. Sophie stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Marcus and Elena were driving back to Phoenix, their headlights cutting through the darkness, their hands probably intertwined across the center console. Somewhere out there, Pete and Rosa were settling into their adobe house in Oatman, checking on the garage, feeding the burros that wandered through town. Somewhere out there, the Desert Nights were riding through the night, protecting and serving and honoring a code as old as the open road. And here, in Tucson, Sophie Delacroix was finally home. She went inside, checked on her sleeping daughters one more time, and climbed into her own bed. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without fear. Morning found her ready to work, ready to build, ready to become the woman her daughters needed her to be. The story of Sophie Delacroix was not over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But the hardest part, the part where everything seemed hopeless, was behind her now. And ahead lay a road stretching toward the horizon, full of possibilities she had not dared to imagine. She would walk that road one step at a time. And she would not walk it alone. If you have watched this far, it is because this story touched something inside you. Perhaps you know what it means to be lost. Perhaps you know what it means to be found. Either way, you are part of this community now, and that means something. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because stories like this one, stories of redemption, of second chances, of ordinary people becoming extraordinary through kindness, only reach you if you are part of the family. Subscribe now, and never miss another moment of hope. If this story moved you, leave a comment below saying, I watched this far. Let me know who you are. Let me know that you believe in the power of grace. Let me know that you are out there, watching, hoping, believing. Like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that their best days are still ahead of them. Share it with someone who has been broken and is learning to heal. Share it with someone who has forgotten that the world still has good people in it, because it does. The world still has good people. And now, you are one of them. We take care of our own. Brotherhood never ends. And this story, like all the best stories, is really about you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing. Thank you for being here. Until next time, keep riding. Keep hoping. Keep being kind to strangers on the road. The journey continues.